You had in France the first government collapse since 1962 on a no confidence vote. So my question to you, Vlad, is what is your takeaway or analysis on what's happening in France? What are the implications around this? And what does this mean basically for either France or even if you have a wider context with the French government collapsing?
This is an interesting one, and I think this is another piece of the puzzle that we already talked about in our previous videos. That it seems like we can see the trend in Europe, where we can say that there are some political forces, whether it's right-wing parties or some Eurosceptics, we can call them. There are some political forces gaining power compared to their previous positions, who are like against the European integration and the common current European political course. And I think if we look at the recent French government collapse, and I think we need to explain that government collapse doesn't mean that the country does not exist anymore, that it was the non-confidence vote from the parliament to the ministers, because they tried to approve the budget, how you say it, they tried to approve the budget without the parliament approval.
Yep.
Yeah. So there was huge budgetary disputes. And then we know that in France, there has always been political fragmentation, and it's getting even stronger. So we know that the right wing, again, they gain power. The Marine Le Pen party, they get the more power. So this one, plus also we know that France has the increasing political debt. The budget debt, increasing budget debt, economic stagnation. The same problems is with other major European countries. And since France is one of the pillars of the European integration, along with Germany and Italy, like the major powers in Europe, to me, the way I see this, the biggest implications from this can be as another illustration of, I don't want to say another nail into the European integration coffin, but it seems something like another piece of the puzzle of this changing trend in European integration, where we will see more and more and more Eurosceptics in the upcoming future.
Yep. So I totally agree. I will actually use the words that you didn't want to use. I do think it's, again, a further nail in the coffin for European integration, for the wider EU project. And the reasons, again, it's much wider than just this vote. This vote in and of itself is not a game changer. It's not necessarily the end of the world. It's not an earthquake like what obviously would happen in Syria. That was in my opinion, earthquake from a political perspective. This is not, but it's still significant. I think for all the reasons you said, but I want to point ourselves in the direction of some of the data and some of the reasons why this is important. So again, I mentioned this is the first government collapse due to a no confidence vote since 1962. Obviously, 1962, you were still dealing with some of the fallout and ramifications of the post-World War II era. Very different dynamics, obviously. Interestingly, this was initiated by, and again, this is a very common theme we've talked about. We talked about this with Germany. We've talked about it with some of the wider issues, even in the U.S. political system. But again, this spreads throughout Europe, that the left and right opposition were the ones who initiated the no confidence vote because they opposed the budget measures that Macron was trying to pass. So again, it had something to do with Social Security reforms, as well as cutting $65 billion from the budget. So again, you had the far right, who's the biggest opposition party, single biggest party actually in the French parliament, and then the second biggest, which is the left bloc. So again, both of them were coming out in agreement to say they're opposed to these type of cuts to the federal budget. So, and again, what this means is if the center is not able to govern, who's going to be the ones who eventually are able to govern and usher in whatever change that the people are looking for? And again, we said it, we've been saying it consistently. I know I was arguing this on the Germany episode. For me, it absolutely is going to be the right-wing opposition or the populist left-wing opposition, because again, the center is no longer holding. They're not able to get any of their agenda items passed. So at some point, these folks will continue to lose ground in elections until eventually we're going to see, in my opinion, most likely the rise of the far right or even possibly the rise of the far left. And the reason I say that is if you look at recent elections in France, so for example, let's go to the 2024, actually in July. So a few months ago, there was legislative elections in France, and the biggest winner was the far right. So the far right actually underperformed. People thought they would do better than they did, but they still won the most votes as the single biggest party, the single biggest bloc, at 37% of the overall vote. And this was again back in July.
This was National Front?
Yeah, National Front, exactly. Marine Le Pen's party and the alliance of the far right. So that's a 20% increase from only 2 years prior, back in 2022. So very clearly this massive ascendancy that you're seeing in the far right in France, which again we've seen in Germany, which again we've seen in Italy, we're seeing it really across the European Union. So then you had the left, who again as a bloc, the collective left won 26% of the vote in July this year, which was actually down from 2022, down by 6%. Macron's party, the center, actually won 25%, so they were the third largest party. And then the center right, who again was one of the main pillars of French politics, only won 5% of the vote. So what we're clearly seeing is you have this massive divergence where the far right is clearly the most ascendant, but elements of the far left are too. So to me, this is really where the future is going to be battled out, because in countries like this, where the governments are not able to pass anything and they can't even get budgets, they can't even, enact most of their agenda, eventually what that's going to mean is that you're going to be ceding political power to somebody else. So again, the far right at 37%, if the current government's not going to be able to get a budget passed, what's going to happen the next go around? So the next presidential election is planned for 2027, where the far right is clearly the favorite at this point. So if you look at the current polls, which again are absurd from 3 years out, but at least they give you an idea as to, get a sense of the public at this stage and where things, might be going. Le Pen right now is polling, again, the far right. She's the leader of the far right party, the National Rally, I think it's called. She's polling at anywhere between 35 and 40% in that first round of the vote. Whereas again, in 2022, the last time she was in the election, she was polling in the high 20s, low 30s. So she's clearly expanded support maybe by up to 10 percentage points, which is, again, she lost to Macron. She only got 41% last time. But again, this is a consistent trend where it seems every election, every opportunity, the far right outperforms, does better than they did before, the far left outperforms, and the middle continues to shrink. And you've got this clear receding in the middle, which is obviously being, replaced by mainly the far right, but then also the far left. And I do want to point your attention to, in the wider context, and why I think this is important is, again, this is a French story, but it's a European story. We talked about Germany, 2 weeks ago. There's a bigger story. Did you see what happened in Romania?
Of course.
Over the past few weeks. Okay, this is closer to your home country. This was insane to me about what happened. So everybody was expecting the election held on November 24th to go a certain direction. You had this independent candidate who was essentially being called a far-right guy. He's anti-Ukraine aid. He's very much a nationalist, far-right, all of these things in Romania. So again, not necessarily a core EU country, but strategically positioned, has a border with Ukraine, one of the eastern flanks, again, of NATO and the European Union. He came out of nowhere, totally unexpected, and got the most votes in the first round of the election, November 24th. The second round of the vote was supposed to take place December 8th. And you saw what happened after that, right? They didn't hold the election.
Right.
So the courts actually annulled the election and said they're postponing the second round of the election on account of what was accused to be what the courts had said was Russian meddling on behalf of this far-right leader. So the courts actually postponed the election. We don't know when it's going to be yet, but at some point they're going to have it. But part of the controversy around that was that he was favored to win. So he was winning in the polls. This guy who came out of nowhere with this far-right message, nationalistic message, anti-Ukraine aid message, and came out of nowhere, won the first round, projected to win the presidency and win the second round as well. So again, this same story continues to prove itself out every step of the way, every election. Italy already elected a far-right leader. France keeps moving further and further in that direction. The far-right in Germany is ascendant. Romania, out of the blue, nobody expected it. The far-right is ascendant there too. Name me a country in the EU, and I'm telling you, the far-right is going to be ascendant. What's your sort of because
you already have the Hungary with the
Hungary obviously
with the right-wing dominance.
Poland as well.
Yes, with the rising, exactly. And I also think that if you think, I totally agree with you. If we look at the wider context, this is not about like single European member states. If we see it as a common European trend, I think these far right movements, they actually they will bring the threat to the entire European project. And this is something I think we need to explore this in our future topics, in future episodes, that like we need to explore the future of European integration in general, because like when I studied international relations in the university, one of my major research was about European politics and the way European Union as the bureaucratic machine operates. And I don't know, but in my opinion, based on my research, even like at that time, it was 15 years ago, but I think that 10 years ago,
You can admit you're a little bit older. That's that's okay.
it's by design. It is designed in a way where it cannot be efficient for a long time. They want it to be very efficient. I know there are a lot of like pro-European politicians, there is a huge pro-European lobby in Europe anyway. But by design, the whole bloc, it's either need to be reformed, or it needs to be like reimagined, or they need to take a step back where actually like, the member states get some additional political freedom. I will put it this way. So what I mean is, when we see this movement where you have like far left and far right, and the centric parties, the centrist parties, they are actually the biggest European
Supporters.
They call them European optimists. We have European optimists and Eurosceptics.
Yep.
Yes. So the centric parties, they are the most optimistic ones, and the right wing, of course, they're the biggest skeptics. Mm-hmm. So I think with the rise of the right wing, with the like common trend in Europe, I think we will see the huge rise of European skepticism.
So what's your assessment? I think this can be the last topic, the last sort of question on this topic. I do think we should do a separate, completely separate, maybe even a full episode on this topic, on the history of the EU, direction where it's going. I think it's a fascinating question. What's your assessment on the future of the European project as a whole, given all these trends? And again, you touched on it, but do you have any sort of initial opinion on where this is going?
My initial opinion is like this. I still believe that, like, I do believe that it will continue, because it's very hard to wind it back. But I firmly believe that they need to either make a step forward and to reform European Union to make it more more powerful as an organization, or they need to reform it in a way where it is still an alliance, or so now it's in the middle. Now it's like we don't understand whether we are organization first, like international organization first, or we are the alliance of the member states. So they need to make this choice whether they're alliance of the single member states, like with like some things in common, like the common economic policy, for example, or common labor market. This is where it's logically can land, or they need to make a step forward and to admit that now we're gonna enforce and we'll make the European political institutions stronger. Now they're stuck in the middle. That's what I think, and I think they need to make a choice.
Yeah.
But honestly, I don't believe that this choice will happen in any nearest future.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And again, you mentioned that you did some sort of project in university. Yeah. I did actually a debate in university as well on the same topic. And the question, it was a final, it was like the final exam, but it was a debate format. So you needed to come well prepared, researched, and you pretty much picked your side of the argument. But both sides had to obviously disagree. So I was on the pro-EU side, and then the other folks were on the anti-EU side. And what was so interesting, because then the class would essentially vote, and then you would get a grade based on how the arguments were. And honestly, I picked the pro-EU side because I thought that was the easiest one. I was like, come on, we don't need to put that much work into it. Pro-EU just makes sense. Oh yeah, EU enlargement is good. Obviously, the geopolitics around it, the economics. And then we got to the debate, because we were lazy around the research, because we just thought, well, the EU just sort of makes sense. So why couldn't we make the clear argument? And the other side came with all the facts, similar to what happened with Brexit, where our argument was essentially geopolitical alignment. We all want to be friends. We all want common prosperity. All these sort of like high,
fluffy things.
Fluffy arguments. Exactly. And they came out with, okay, well, what about the labor market impacts? What about the budget impacts? And we were blown away. We lost the debate. And it was obvious to me then, this is so much deeper of a question. And it goes obviously into not just the economics around it, not just the issues around free trade within the Eurozone and the European Union, not only the issues around monetary policy and a common EU tax, a common EU defense policy, all of these things, but even the cultural issue, obviously. You've got, 28 countries in the EU? How many unique languages? Probably at least like 15 or something. So that's going to be, I think, a great standalone topic. But last thing I'll say on this, from my perspective, and again, it's a bit early to declare it dead. I think the EU is dead. I think the EU, as we currently know, I know you probably expected me to say that. I think the EU, as we know it, is over, and I think it's going to die a slow death, to be honest. But I don't see a future for the EU where, again, barring massive reform, the likes of which you were talking about, probably even more. How can you have one political bloc with Romania and Portugal in the same bloc when these are on two opposite sides of the continent? France and Estonia, for example, interests are going to be totally different. The people culturally are different. The languages are different. Every element of those two countries are different. So I think let's dive into this topic in a much deeper way on another episode. But again, I think going back to the original question, this French governmental collapse is just a sign of the direction that Europe is moving into, which is a nationalist move, which is, again, the rise of the far right, perhaps elements of the far left as well. Bad for European unity, good for nationalism.